Theatrical Shenanigans Law and Order series, Episode 6. Hello there, and welcome to our final episode in this Law and Order series here on Theatrical Shenanigans. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far and are looking forward to this last episode. This week we'll be listening to the play That Question. Dr. Astell is most curious when famous playwright Harriet Montaine is brought in for psychological examination after murdering her husband. However, through questioning, he starts to learn that there are some questions best left not asked. Theatrical Shenanigans presents That Question by Rachel Feeney Williams.
This the one that was brought in last night?
That's right, Doctor. She bumped off her husband.
Some slightly more professional language, please?
Sorry, sir.
Where's her information?
Here, sir.
Harriet Montaine. Harriet Montaine, the playwright?
That's right, sir.
Good Lord, I've seen most of her works. She's a genius.
Well, can't say I'm much of a theater fan, sir.
What on earth is she doing here? Oh.
Yes, sir. The police brought her in around 2 a.m. They've asked for your analysis and opinion.
Right, well, let's see what we can do to assist them.
I just don't understand it, sir.
Understand what?
Well, she looks so normal.
Very few people who suffer with a mental condition or have a psychotic break appear abnormal at first. Harriet Montaine was famous in the theater world for over 2 decades. She brought wondrous and fabulous plays to the stage. She was a pacifist to the point where she'd never even put violence in her plays.
Until she stabbed her husband 32 times, sir.
Quite. Well, let's see if we can get to the bottom of it, shall we? Mrs. Montaine? I am Dr. Astell, Mrs. Montaine.
Well, given this is a psychiatric hospital, I presumed a conversation with a doctor was inevitable.
I'm here to assess you in relation to the events that occurred last night.
I see. Well, I suppose I should give you my full attention. Aw, your friend seems less than enthusiastic about being here. You don't have to linger in the doorway like a child, petrified of facing their elderly aunt for one reason or another.
Oh, I
used to have an aunt like that. Mildred was her name. She smoked these hideous-smelling cigarettes on sticks, and whenever I said anything she deemed as stupid or ignorant, she would jab me with it. Such a delightful woman.
It's all right, Sam. You may go.
Are you sure, sir?
Is it standard practice in this hospital for underlings to question their superiors? If so, I should like to be moved. I could not possibly stay in an establishment with no clear authority structure.
I assure you, Mrs. Montaine, that will not be necessary. Sam, you can go.
Right, Doctor.
Is that better for you, Mrs. Montaine?
Doctor, I think we both know that your concerns about what is better for me reach only as far as you require to get information out of me about my husband's death. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Well then, I can inform you that having the young man in here while you question me, looking like he was about to piss his pants, would have no bearing on my answers whatsoever.
I see.
So all you have done so far in this questioning is waste your own time.
I think you...
Can I recommend you get to the point of this interview before I start finding you tedious and less inclined to say anything at all?
Right.
Because that wouldn't look very good to your comrades in the police force, would it? A psychiatric doctor, unable to get to the reason of why a seemingly normal woman committed a heinous crime. Well?
May I sit down?
As you most certainly have more rights than I, at this point, I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to sit down.
So, Mrs. Montaine.
Should that not be the former Mrs. Montaine?
I'm sorry.
Well, you'll pardon my bluntness, but my husband is dead and currently decaying as we speak. Surely that invalidates my title as Mrs. Montaine.
Not at all. In fact, normally.
But these are not normal circumstances, Doctor.
Are they not?
You stab your wife every day, then?
You assume I'm married?
You may not wear your wedding ring when working, but the tan line where it should be is very distinctive.
Ah, I see. Very observant.
Why is that?
I'm sorry?
That you don't wear your wedding ring while working. Is it so your damaged female patients will be seduced by the idea of the charming single doctor and are more likely to reveal their secrets?
No,
Is it because the very idea of having that piece of metal touching your skin reminds you of the heinous woman you have waiting for you back home?
What?
It's a simple question, Doctor. Do you hate your wife?
Of course not.
No. Your outburst is evidence that you are as loyal to your wife as a needy little puppy dog.
Some would say it's because I love her.
Would you say that?
Excuse me?
Would you say you love your wife?
Mrs. Montaine, this is not about my wedding ring or my wife.
Interesting. Aren't you going to ask me why it's interesting?
And further allow you to deflect from answering the questions I am actually here to ask?
A very shrewd observation, Doctor. All right. I will make you a deal.
Deals aren't usually the way this process works.
But you need something from me, do you not?
Not especially. A simple notation that you were uncooperative or incoherent, and that relieves me of all responsibility.
You would lie.
At this point, Mrs. Montaine, the description of uncooperative seems a fairly suitable word for yourself.
On the contrary, Doctor, I have been very cooperative. I have offered you a suggestion that allows us both to get what we want.
Your deal.
Precisely. Plus the fact that you are clearly dying to know the facts as they unfolded last night.
Is that so?
If it wasn't, you would have left already. Is that not right? Well, Doctor, your move.
What are the terms?
It's very simple. You ask me a question, and I will ask you a question.
What about rules?
My life is an open book, Doctor. I'll even give you the first question. Ask away.
Do you remember what happened last night?
Of course, I'm not a simpleton, Doctor.
And what? Fine. What is your question?
What do you believe caused the events of last night?
It's too early in my questioning to be able to make that diagnosis.
But if you had to, just on instinct.
I don't...
Oh, come on, Doctor. You can't sit there and tell me that you didn't have opinions of what I'd done and why the moment you saw my name on your chart or saw my face through the window. If you're going to lie, then there's no point in playing, and I shall return to my cards.
Stress-induced psychotic break due to overwork.
Interesting.
Why?
Is that your question? Well?
What do you remember about the events of last night?
Very good, Doctor. Very controlled.
Answer the question!
I do not appreciate your tone.
Please?
Much better. I'd been at a rehearsal all day. My latest production opens at the Broadhurst Theater in a week.
I have tickets for the Friday evening, I believe.
You are a fan of mine.
Is that your question?
Very clever, Doctor. No, it's not.
So, what happened after you came home?
My husband was pouring us both a glass of wine in the kitchen.
Is that a usual event?
Doctor, if you continue to add questions within questions, then you will never get the original answer you were looking for.
I'm sorry. Go on.
I came into the kitchen, and he was standing there, glass of wine in hand, beaming from ear to ear. I thought he'd just had a good day himself, and I asked him so.
And? Never mind.
He told me he'd had an all right day. It was one of my pet peeves about him, his inability to locate an adjective above the level of moody teenager. Everything was all right, okay, and fine.
And that annoyed you?
Dear Doctor, you've interrupted your own question with another question. That means it's my turn.
But wait, I didn't mean it.
Dr. Astell, I have reminded you about that particular rule once before. The fact that you have chosen to ignore it is not my fault.
But
My turn, I believe?
Fine.
Why are you a fan of my work?
Well, in my line of work, you see so much darkness and tragedy. It was wonderfully refreshing to see performance that portrays the good and the joy in life. You're smiling. That's made you happy.
Appreciation for my hard work always makes me happy. It's why most creatives want nothing more than to have their work in the spotlight, for it to be loved, cherished, and appreciated.
Not always.
Yes, well, there are always one or two Neanderthals who wouldn't know decent theater if it ripped off their testicles and used their penis to stoke a burning fire.
Interesting choice of phrasing.
I'm a theatrical wordsmith, Doctor. Interesting phrasing is what brings people like you to the theater time and again. It's what keeps me writing. Your turn, I believe.
You talked about what makes you happy just now.
That is not a question.
What made you unhappy last night specifically?
You presume a specific event created so much negative emotion in me that I was inclined to murder my husband.
Is that a question?
Just an observation.
So?
I'm not in any rush, Doctor, so you would do well to adjust your tone.
I'm sorry. In your own time.
That's better. And to answer your question, my husband and his questions made me unhappy.
What kind of...
Did you always know you wanted to be a doctor?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, it's hardly fair if you take your frustrations out on me.
Mrs. Montaine, you stated this deal was to give us something we both wanted.
Correct.
Well, so far, you have given me nothing.
Well, I disagree.
Maybe this is your plan all along. To string me along with riddle-like answers and waste my time.
All right. If I give you some pertinent information, then will you continue the game?
What kind of information?
The kind that will guide you in the questions you should be asking.
I don't know.
Come on. You know you want to know.
All right. So tell me.
The thing you need to know about my husband and I, Doctor, is that we shared one wonderful element in our relationship. A distaste for inane and irrelevant questions.
Really? But you've been asking...
None of the questions I've asked you have been inane or irrelevant, Doctor. At least, not in my mind.
Is that right?
Yes. I have a fascination with new discoveries about people. Every answer you have given me has allowed me to discover more about you.
What kind of...
Am I allowed to finish my information?
Sorry. Go on.
When Marcus and I first married, he had his interests and I had mine, and neither of us cared enough to discuss the others.
I see.
You think that odd.
Well, yes.
Because supposedly it is in the nature of couples to want to discuss and question the other's interests so they can have stimulating conversation.
That is the general thought process.
For most, maybe, but not for us.
How so?
On our first date, Marcus and I shared a lengthy intellectual conversation about religion, politics, our families, and our careers. Then he attempted to steer the conversation towards my playwriting, which at the time was just a hobby.
And that was... wrong?
I stopped him dead in his tracks. I said to him, "Do you genuinely have the slightest interest in the theater at all, let alone my writing for it?" He replied, honestly and concisely, with, "No."
Right.
At that point, I knew I loved him. A man with no pretense but pure honesty. We agreed then if one of us had no interest in a topic the other one started to discuss, then we would simply say so and offer an alternative person within our friendship and family circle to discuss it with.
So you are saying that for 20 years of marriage, you and your husband only discussed...
Shared interests.
But that...
is what kept our marriage in a wonderful state of harmony for many years, Doctor.
It's certainly a different way of doing things.
And now you may ask.
I'm sorry?
Ask the question that you should need to ask based on what I've told you about the way our marriage worked.
What changed?
Exactly! When I returned from rehearsal and saw the great idiot grinning at me, I thought he was going to announce a raise or a promotion, something that would be mutually beneficial to us. Instead, What he tells me is that he's been thinking about our marriage and talking to a therapist. A therapist, of all people!
I don't...
Before you tell me you don't understand, a therapist is the kind of person who will listen to your problems, the way you see things and the way your life is, and then simply prescribe a new pattern of behavior that completely overrides your own, simply because it is a pattern of behavior that is based on normality.
Well, I think...
I do not deal in normality, Doctor. I deal in creativity. I create worlds of happiness and joy. That should have been enough of an answer for my husband when he asked me after all our years of marriage, knowing I would hate the question. He then asked me, "What's the new play about?"
That was it?
It? Oh no, Doctor, that was far from it. From there, he descended into this rant of psychobabble about how if we really wanted to connect, we should be able to talk about our passions and our interests that weren't shared.
So, what did you...
The fact that I managed to remain calm after that first stream of drivel was remarkable, Doctor, I can tell you. But then it came.
What did?
In an attempt to understand me, he'd read some reviews of my plays, and then the scripts themselves.
So what happened then?
Then began his critiques of my work. He talked about how he didn't understand where my ideas came from, or why my characters were always happy. I tried, Doctor. I really tried to explain to him about my ideas, but he just wouldn't accept it.
How do you mean?
He just kept staring at me blankly with this stupid grin on his face and repeatedly going, "Why? But why? But why that, though?"
So, his persistent questioning...
I begged him. I pleaded with him to let me leave the room. I told him I would forget all about it and we could just return to our marriage the way it had been. Perfectly happy for many years.
And then?
Then he had the gall to look me in the face and say our marriage wasn't working anymore.
I can imagine you'd find that upsetting.
Upsetting isn't the word. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears and my blood boiling. I didn't know how much longer I could be in that room with him. And then I heard it. My own voice exclaim, "Well, it works for me!" And then he said it.
Said what?
Why?
Oh.
After all the stupid, pointless questions he'd asked about my work, he then wanted me to stand there and justify why the way our marriage had worked for many years still suited me. Why? 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 He wouldn't stop asking why.
What happened then?
I took up a knife from the kitchen draining board and stabbed him until he stopped asking. Oh. I'm so sorry, Doctor. Was there anything else you wanted to ask?
No, that's all I need, thank you.
Well, it was lovely to meet you anyway, Doctor.
Yes, you too.
Everything okay, Doctor?
What? Oh, yes, I'm fine.
Did you manage to get everything you needed?
Yes. Actually, I think this could prove to be quite a fascinating case.
Oh, really? Why?
What did you say?
I asked. Why? What? What did I say? Doctor!
That was That Question by Rachel Feeney Williams, with Jeff Priskorn as Dr. Astell, Jacqueline Priskorn as Harriet, and Michael Shipman as Orderly. Theatrical Shenanigans is part of an RFW Scripts production, found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, and Podbean. Theme music is written and produced by Chris Cody.